Welcome to Michigan in Focus. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. With me are Tom Gantert, the Center Square Managing Editor, and Scott McClellan, Michigan Correspondent. Let's start with you, Scott. You wrote a story this week about a new study recommending increasing school spending in the state.
Yeah, the new report from the Education Law Center and the Michigan Education Association says Michigan needs $4.5 billion annually so students can achieve state academic standards. The report says that districts with more low-income students and those in rural areas tend to be further from adequate funding than districts with fewer lower-income students and districts in cities or suburbs.
Wait a minute. Doesn't the budget that was put forth by Governor Whitmer, didn't it increase immeasurably the amount of money that goes to education in the state?
Increased about $2.5 billion.
We've had record education spending for the past 2 years. However, this study did not account for about $6 billion of federal COVID funds that went to Michigan schools.
What else does it say about increased funding being to the net positive for Michigan students?
The study says that more than 90% of Michigan school districts are underfunded at some level, with 77% of all Michigan public school students attending in districts that are more than $2,000 per pupil below adequacy.
Okay, well, listen, Tom, you've been covering school funding issues here in Michigan for more than a decade.
I have.
I know you have. I've read much of it. So what is your analysis of this study and its recommendations?
Let's take a step away from the study, which I have some issues with, and let's look at the raw numbers. School funding, total school funding in Michigan, and let's look at 2019-20, the year before the pandemic, came in at $16 billion. Over the course of the next 3 years, it went from $16 billion to $21.7 billion to $17.1 billion to $19.6 billion. Now, this does count the pandemic spending because they are spending it and they did get it. So there was a huge increase. Federal funding of Michigan's K-12 schools went from $1.7 billion to $7.8 billion during the pandemic year. And then it leveled off. But the reality is public schools are getting from, if you look 5 years ago, they got $14.8 billion. Now they're getting $19.6 billion. So without a doubt, public schools are getting more money and it's in the billions. The other thing the district says is that the students that are being harmed are the ones with the districts with more low-income students. Now, the Michigan Department of Education, I'm going to throw some numbers at you here. Every year it puts out what the average per pupil revenues are for each school district. The state average is $12,816 per pupil. Detroit gets $25,761. That's more than double. Flint gets $27,192. It's more than double the state average. Pontiac gets $33,888. You're almost getting to triple the state average. Benton Harbor, $17,258. Lansing, $20,881. State average is $12,800. All of these school districts that have a higher amount of low-income students are getting significantly more money than the state average. So let's look at Lansing. Lansing, $20,881 per pupil, which is on the low end. Remember, Flint's getting $27,000, Detroit, Lansing at $20,881. What are some districts that are rural in that area and higher income? Okemos, $13,365 per pupil. Lansing gets almost 50% more. DeWitt, $11,407 per pupil, another suburban affluent district. Lansing gets almost double them. Hazlitt, $13,805, another suburban district with fewer low-income students in Lansing. They get $7,000 less per pupil. So the idea that low-income students are being hurt more doesn't track with the data, which shows that and the reason that is federal funding. These figures I show you do include pandemic funding, and how you can do a study on school funding and not include COVID federal emergency money, I would have a big question why you would do that. It's not like it's not being spent.
Anything else to add to that, Tom?
Yeah, I think this is something that we've heard over and over again, that the numbers don't track. That poor communities have lower funded school districts. Nothing could be further from the truth in Michigan. And it is federal funding, by the way, that makes this difference. The gap got a lot bigger since 2020 in the pandemic, because the pandemic heavily favored school districts, lower income students. the question also is, what is enough? Why did they come up with that figure of 4.2 billion or whatever it is? Because the reality is they're getting more money, but it's never been enough. And for the additional money that we are getting, the $5.5 billion more in school funding we're getting right now compared to 5 years ago, are we seeing better results? No. So the question is, what guarantees do we have that if we came up with this money, we would get better funding when the better funding hasn't produced better results academically?
Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. This is Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.